Right, and we are live. Welcome, DoorGrow hackers, to the DoorGrow Show. If you are a property management entrepreneur that wants to add doors, make a difference, increase revenue, help others, impact lives, and you are interested in growing your business and life, and you are open to doing things a bit differently, then you are a DoorGrow hacker. DoorGrow hackers love the opportunities, daily variety, unique challenges, and freedom that property management brings. Many in real estate think you're crazy for doing it. You think they're crazy for not, because you realize that property management is the ultimate high trust gateway to real estate deals, relationships, and residual income. At DoorGrow, we are on a mission to transform property management businesses and their owners. We want to change the industry, eliminate the BS, build awareness, change perception, expand the market, and help the best property management entrepreneurs win. I'm your host, property management growth hacker Jason Hull, the founder of Open Potion, Gather Kudos, Thunder Local, and of course, DoorGrow. Now let's get into the show. So today I have a really interesting guest with a really interesting topic. I'm hanging out with Marnie Matthews, who has alliteration in her name we were talking about before the show. So Marnie, welcome to the show, and I love your celebrity sounding name. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Sure. So thank you for having me. It's an opportunity for me also. So I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I specialize in working with people with hoarding disorder, hoarding behavior, and excessive clutter. And we can get into the differences in those later on.
Okay.
I actually started doing this about 8 years ago. I was watching the TV shows, imagine that, and completely intrigued by this disorder. So at the same time, I actually went back to school as a mature student to get my master's in social work, and had the opportunity to intern at a elder service agency at a hoarding program. So I had no idea that those two paths were going to cross. But as soon as I found out that I could work with people with hoarding situations, I dove into it head first, and I've been doing it ever since.
So what was so fascinating to you about hoarding? I mean, I read your bio and you saw this on the TV show, and even then you were like so fascinated by it. So what do you think caught your attention about it that was so interesting?
Sure. I think I'm just completely intrigued by the mental health piece, by the family dynamics, just by it's so multifaceted. And I think a piece of it appeals to my ADHD
Hmm.
because with hoarding disorder, there's so many other things that are tied into it that you always are having to think on your feet. There's a different way to get from point A to point B with every client. There's different people that you work with if you're doing crisis management. So I think the disorder just completely intrigues me, and the work just keeps me constantly growing and curious and moving forward.
Now, how common is hoarding? Because I imagine property management business owners, they run into this. They have tenants that are doing this, and they're having to deal with the cleanup afterwards, and it's just, or they're doing an inspection and then surprise, they've got somebody that's starting to, look like this. Um, how prevalent or common is it? Is there any idea on that?
Yes, there is. So research shows that 3 to 5% of the population of the United States struggles with hoarding disorder. However, we think that's actually really low. It's probably close to double that, because as a lot of property managers will probably be able to attest to, most people in these hoarded situations are discovered rather than self-reporting. So either they
Right.
don't realize that they have a problem with low insight and not seeing that it's a problem, or they may know but not know how to handle it and not being able to reach out for help due to like shame, embarrassment, or fear of judgment. So we're thinking it's close to 8 to 10% of the population.
Yeah, and imagine the shame factor is probably almost always coupled with that. There's this sense that it's something I'm doing is bad, sick, and wrong, and I need to hide this. And so, yeah, I would imagine it's not as reported as people may think. It's like people just don't know. So, how do hoarders typically get identified? And maybe you could explain what it really is. What is hoarding?
So very good question. So we'll start to back it up. So there's a diagnostic or diagnosis. It's called hoarding disorder, but there's a hoarding
Okay.
disorder there's hoarding behavior, and then there's issues like excessive clutter that's due to like chronic disorganization and things like that. So a lot of people, due to what they see on the TV shows, if they see clutter that's excessive in their perspective, they automatically might label it hoarding. So the biggest difference is somebody with true hoarding disorder, the primary feature we look for is somebody who has extreme difficulty or the inability to let things go. So if you go into a cluttered home and say, hey, we're here to help, what can we do? And the person's like, oh, I've been waiting for help, just take stuff and help me. You know, I have no problem with you helping me. And they can get rid of
Then they're
things.
not a hoarder.
They don't have hoarding disorder, correct.
Right,
However,
got it. Okay.
they can have hoarding behavior, and that hoarding behavior can be due to other mental health issues that, you know, let's say they're severely depressed. Once the depression subsides or those symptoms are alleviated in some way, they're able to work on the clutter, or they're better able to address it.
Okay, so there's other things like causing it, but they're not technically a hoarder or having, have hoarding disorder.
Correct.
Okay,
So the
and then
level of
excessive clutter.
Right. The level of clutter does not indicate whether there's hoarding disorder or not. There's a likelihood if it's a certain level or above, but it doesn't definitely indicate that. But there's people that are just chronically disorganized, and that can be from, you know, symptoms, speaking of like ADHD, people that are just have trouble keeping up with things, people maybe medically, they're unable to keep up with the general housekeeping of their home. But the difference between clutter and hoarding is clutter, you figure you can clean it up pretty quickly, pretty easily. Like if somebody's going to come over in 30 minutes or an hour, people would be able to attend to it and get it cleaned up. And it also doesn't impact the activities of daily living, like being able to prepare food, being able to get to and use the bathroom in the home or sleep on the bed. When you have somebody with hoarding disorder and you ask them to clean things up, they honestly believe that they can, and they will say, oh yes, I can do this. But given an hour's time, they're generally not able to do any of it because of the hoarding disorder itself. Also because they struggle with things like depression, anxiety, ADD, and ADHD. And they also have shown that people with hoarding disorder, their brains work differently. So there's a lot of processing issues. So being able to organize and categorize and make decisions is very difficult, which is why somebody with hoarding disorder, you just take, you know, can we clean this up? Oh, absolutely, I can do it. And then an hour later, generally nothing's been done.
Yeah, they feel they're stuck. They get in these loops and spirals. They get frustrated. The anxiety builds, and then they end up just in overwhelm, and probably nothing's accomplished.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. So the difference between just excessive clutter. So a property manager may walk into a property and see excessive clutter, but if it's not impacting daily activities, like they can get in and out of doors safely, they can sleep in their bed, they can cook food, like those kind of things, it's just mess. And
Right.
it's not technically that they maybe have a hoarding disorder. They're just messy.
Right. And so in instances where I'm working with property management to do what I call crisis case management, I don't spend a lot of time during that crisis period, whether it's a week, whether it's 6 months that we're working on the clutter, to be able to bring things to like lease compliance. What I focus on is just those safety issues. I know that the uniform inspection checklist, I think, is attached in the description on here. That is a tool that we use that helps people pass inspections, and it talks about just what you were saying. Are there egresses? Are there pathways? Is there room to prepare food? Are there trip and fall hazards? By doing that, we're able to take the subjectivity out of it. Like if some people's tolerance for clutter is a lot lower than others, and that can impact how we make a judgment on whether things are safe or pass inspection. So that uniform inspection checklist kind of keeps us all on the same page, and it also helps the resident to know whether they have hoarding issues or not, they still need egresses, pathways, unobstructed windows, things like that.
Okay, and that checklist is also available on your website.
Correct.
Correct.
Cluttermovement.com. It's on one of the top tabs, yes.
Okay. And okay, great. And what's the name of your website again, just so people?
The Clutter Movement.
Thecluttermovement.com. Okay, great. Got it. So property managers can check out that checklist. And so how do you help property managers, and how can you help? So say a property manager comes across this and they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do about this? What are sort of the first steps, and then where do you get involved in, and what can you help them do?
Right. So first of all, it's really important to remember that this is a mental health issue and that we do need to approach the person as a person with compassion and remembering that they are in a situation that this person likely did not choose to live this way. If you show them a picture of their life 20 years ago and said, this is how it's going to be in 20 years, this was not their dream.
Right.
So to remember that. That being said, while we want to have compassion and empathy, we still understand that property management, you have other liabilities. You want to be compassionate, understanding with this, but you have other liabilities and responsibilities to maybe other tenants in the surrounding area also. So what we suggest is to use the harm reduction approach. And again, I'll refer to that, the checklist, the uniform inspection checklist is based on the harm reduction approach. So for example, if I went into a home and it was highly cluttered and let's say I couldn't open the door, typically people will go in and say, there's too much stuff here. You need to get rid of all the books that are behind the door, get rid of 80% of your belongings, things like that. What that does is for anybody, if you were to walk in their house and tell them what to do with their stuff, no matter if we have clutter or not, we're going to say, hey, stop telling me what to do. So the approach we use, the harm reduction approach, is having a conversation and saying, I noticed that when we tried to open the door, I couldn't open it all the way, and I'm concerned about your safety. How can I help you make this safe? And by doing that, we're not talking about the clutter. So the harm reduction approach is a way to reduce risk. It's not a way to solve the hoarding problem necessarily, but with that checklist, people to follow. So once they meet all those targets, they're able to, people that are in the home with them, if it's family, if it's home care workers or other people coming in to help them, can pay attention to those areas. But that harm reduction approach works even if you have somebody that doesn't understand that they have a mental health issue. So they have no insight to the problem, it's still effective. And if they do realize there's a problem, it can be effective. Everybody with hoarding issues really needs to get mental health treatment and support. Unfortunately, resources are slim because there's so few of us around. So in the absence of that harm reduction approach is the absolutely best way to approach things.
And so initially you say starting out from a space of compassion and approaching them, how can we help make sure that you're safe with their well-being in mind instead of whatever the typical response is. And so what's the typical response you run into? Like you step in and they're dealing with a problem and it's probably gone the wrong way, but what do people typically try to do that doesn't work?
The typical response is things like the statements I said earlier, like get rid of all your books. Get rid of 80% of your things. So the typical response, I even had one property manager years and years ago tell somebody she had too many pillows on her bed. And that was coming from a place of, I don't know what else to say because this is so overwhelming. I always compare the typical responses I get, I compare them to what we do with our children sometimes when we're really frustrated. We threaten them with things that we can't, like I'm taking your phone away forever for my 14-year-old. And then I'm like, oh wait, I need her to have the phone. So it usually comes out of frustration, and remembering that, this is, again, a human being. They do have a mental health issue. They are struggling. So if you can approach it again with that harm reduction approach, that is just the best way to do it. Try to take out all the personal feelings you have about the items that they have in their home and just approach it as a matter of fact, objective, safety first. And then beyond that, if we can connect them with somebody to help, if there's a hoarding task force in the area, if there's if it's an elder, if there's adult protective services you can pull in or something to that effect, that's the best way to approach it.
Okay, so initially they're going to feel some frustration. They're going to be freaking out when they see this place, probably initially. And so the goal initially is just to shift from that space of frustration and fear to compassion and focusing on their safety and well-being. That's kind of the first step. So then you mentioned that there's maybe some things, to put them towards, but then what would they do next? Like how do they deal with this?
So here's the trick. Or the tricky piece is if you're doing this and you don't have any other supports, it's going to be frustrating because dealing with hoarding issues anyways is frustrating. It's the disorder is chronic and progressive. Recidivism rate is high. So again, that harm reduction approach is the most successful that we have. If you go in and take everything away, you've caused trauma and loss, which means you've triggered the hoarding behavior and it's just going to get worse. So keeping that in mind, being able, again, to use that checklist and say something like, okay, we need to be able to open and close the front door and the back door all the way. What can we do to help you get that done within a week or within 2 weeks? and then check back in often to see if they've been able to accomplish that, if they're able to bring in family members to see or somebody that can help. A key piece with that too is that if you go back and find out that there's not as much done as you hoped, most people will respond by going, "What are you thinking? You're about to be evicted. You know, do you want to be homeless? You know, we just cleaned the pathway and now it's all messed up again." What I find is the best approach is to say, you know, last week you worked really hard, you had the pathway clear. Now I see that it's cluttered again. What didn't work? Because again, you figure if somebody's lived in a cluttered home for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, there's a lot of bad habits they have from living in that home.
Yeah.
So being able to find out what their habits are. And again, if you're property management, that's really not your role because that's kind of a mental health piece. But just remembering that walking through it like that, you're going to get the person to buy in more than doing the threatening, which again, we all tend to do sometimes because it just gets so frustrating and overwhelming.
Right. I always say whenever we fail to inspire, we always control.
Yeah, well
Yeah.
said.
And that's the default. But if we can somehow inspire them to make these changes and choose into it, um, then great. So explain your organization and what you do and how that might help property management entrepreneurs.
Sure, thank you. So the Clutter Movement is, right now it's mostly online work. And what I do is consultations. I do trainings, in-person trainings all across the United States. I do consultations. So if you have a case where you're concerned about what to do, we can set up a consultation and talk through what the process is. But the other piece that we add to it is we also have services and supports for individuals and family members. So I run groups for individuals and family members online to help them understand not only what's going on with them with the mental health piece, but if there's a situation where a property management or a board of health, somebody like that has called me and said, we're having difficulty managing the situation, then we set up a consultation with that resident too and talk them through the process. So we're kind of supporting the work that the property manager is trying to do.
Okay, so you can help to support the property manager. You also can work directly to help support the person with the disorder or behavior problem.
Correct.
With hoarding, and you can also work with that individual's family as in a support related role as well. And so I'm sure then there's lots of questions like, how should I approach this? What should I do?
Right.
And there's a lot of guidance there to make sure that you're following this compassionate process that's going to work instead of dig them and entrench them deeper into the problem.
Correct. And that's like the consultation piece. And then I also want to ensure people that what the work that I do, oftentimes when I do work where I'm actually on site, people find out the social worker is coming to help and everybody rolls their eyes like, oh great,
Yeah.
you know, now the person's going to be here for 5 years going through therapy before we get anything done. The work
Right.
that we do with the crisis case management is quite the opposite. We want to have compassion and work in a reasonable time frame for the individual, but we do understand the liabilities that have to happen with property management. So we negotiate through that consultation, we negotiate what's reasonable but what's not. And being able to set up, you know, times to have them go in and check in on the person to make sure they're meeting those targets so that there's some accountability and some leverage to be able to do that. The other thing that I wanted to say, I'm sorry, but the other thing too I wanted to say is that a piece of the work too is also finding resources, local resources. So if somebody were to do a consultation and say, you know, we have somebody, typically what we get is somebody who's 65 years old, she's been living in this home and, you know, it's highly cluttered. We have an inspection. What we'll do is see if there's an elder service agency in the area, a task force in the area, but we work to connect people also, even though I might not be on site. We'll work to connect them with people that can be on site to help out with the situation.
Yeah, that sounds pretty invaluable. So could you, I don't know if you feel comfortable, but could you explain, I think one thing that helps compassion is helping understand how the hoarder really sees it. And you mentioned it's kind of like the equivalent if you come in the wrong way, like you're telling them to get rid of their stuff. But where are they at? Like, what's their mindset? What are their fears? Maybe you could give us an idea of what the experience is like for a hoarder, which I think would help, all the listeners understand like what they're dealing with and what they're going through a little bit more.
Right. So that's a good question. So one of the things that I do when I do trainings, I always start out with an exercise, and you're going to have to kind of imagine this, where I have everybody that's attending the training
Mm-hmm.
bring out whatever they have that they brought all their personal items in. So if it's a purse, if it's a wallet, if it's a book bag,
Okay.
backpack, anything like that.
Got my
Thank
cell
you. There
phone.
you go.
Got my wallet.
There you
My
go.
money clip. Okay.
So what I do is have them take that out and then give it to the person next to them.
Okay.
Perfect. Once they give it
So
to the
you
person next to them,
those
then I
persons.
say that the person that has your items now is going to open up. So for women, it's going to open up your purse. They're going to go
Yeah.
through it, go through the wallet, pick out 2 to 3 things that they feel don't belong, and I'm going to take them home with me and throw them away.
Wow.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't follow through with that. However,
Yeah.
working up to that point, the panic, the anxiety that people have that don't even have hoarding disorder, just imagining somebody else going through their things and deciding what's important, because how do you know what's important to me? I might have something that doesn't look important to you, but it could be extremely valuable to me. So that's one piece of it. Another thing is that I had somebody that I worked with for a couple of years, and one of the things that she had in her home that was very difficult for her to get rid of, she had 2 drawers, large kitchen drawers, that were full of bread ties. So if you can imagine how little those things
Yeah.
are anyways, the twist,
Yeah.
the little plastic, imagine how small they are, but she had drawers stuffed full of them, and she could not get rid of them. I mean, she just could not let go of those items. When we talked about it, when we initially were working together, she said it was because, she needed to recycle them, she could reuse them. But after we were able to get through a couple months of therapy, she had a moment where she goes, you know what? She realized she was holding on to those items because she had a very rough time as a single mother raising her children and finding jobs, sometimes being unemployed, sometimes not being able to provide for her kids. Those bread ties for her were the link that proved that she was a good mother and took care of her kids. So a lot of
I'm
times,
feeding them.
right. And so a lot of times the things people are holding on to is about their identity. Is it something that, somebody has a ton of cookbooks because they want to have people over and they want to be able to cook this great meal, and that's who they want to be, but they're not able to do that. Is it somebody, I worked with somebody once who had a couple rooms in their upstairs that were inaccessible, and they were full of clothes, most of them with tags on them still, from a job that she had retired from 20 years prior. But she couldn't get rid of any of them because that was her identity. If I get rid of those clothes, who am I now? Because that's who I was. So in being able to understand that, it may look like trash to us. It may look like something that, clearly you're never going to wear again, or you never have worn, and it's been there for 20 or 30 years. But you have to think about, what does this mean to that person? That could mean, that's that person's identity, what they're wrapped up in. If it's things like recycling, if people keep a lot of recycling, that's kind of their identity, the person who can recycle things, or the person who has something for everybody. They collect everything because that way, if you need anything, they've got it, and they're that go-to person. Exactly.
That makes sense. I watched a documentary on Netflix. I believe it was called Minimalism, I think the authors wrote a book called Essentialism or something. And after that, I was like, oh, I started clearing out my closet, and I started getting rid of some stuff because I was like, oh, this stuff's slowing me down. And so, but it was a mindset shift. And I was obviously, I'm not a hoarder. I don't even have excessive clutter. I'm probably not the neatest guy, my wife would probably say, but there was still a transition I had to go through to shift my mindset to see, hey, I don't need everything. I don't need every single shirt. I don't even wear some of these shirts. I don't even wear some of these pants, but they're there because maybe I'll use them eventually, right? And so that shift. Do you ever see then with hoarding disorder or hoarding behavior or even excessive clutter, do you ever see radical transformation, or is it always a really long-term thing?
That's another thing that I find so intriguing about this disorder. The answer is yes. So I find radical transformation where people just get it all of a sudden, and then I find it where people have to work on the mental health piece for years before they get it. And then there's some people that can work on the clutter, and then the mental health piece they kind of get to at some other point. So there's no way, you can't quantify it at all to say, how long do you need treatment? We've got a protocol for treatment, but you just never know what exactly it is that's going to trigger them to be able to make these decisions. Usually for me, there's actually 2 questions that I ask everybody I work with. And I'm working with anybody because I like to work in collaborative teams. So for example, if it's a property manager, I'm going to let them know the answer to these two questions so we can help keep the person motivated and help keep them looking to move forward. So the first question that I ask is, if you woke up tomorrow and your home was as you wanted it to be, what would your life be like? So not what the home would be like, but what the life be like. The number one answer I get is freedom. The number two answer is you wouldn't be here, which is fine with me because I'm like, okay, we can work towards that also. The second question I ask is, what is something that you want to do that you're not doing now or can't do because of the condition of your home or the clutter in your home? So, people want to have people over. One a very tough case that I worked once was they've been working with the couple for about 18 months prior to bringing me in. It was a highly cluttered home, very narrow pathways, everything up to the ceiling. They needed to put a hospital bed in the living room for the wife to have surgery. Not have surgery at home, clearly, but after the surgery to be able to
recover. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And they hadn't, in 18 months, they really hadn't been able to do a lot of work with them. So I asked them both the same thing. One of the things that stuck out with me is the gentleman said, well, I'm going to play the piano again. That's what I want to do again. So I asked him, I said, well, what room is the piano in? And I was actually standing right next to it and unable to see a grand piano because of the clutter in the home.
Wow.
But what
he's like a threat.
Right. But what would happen when people would go knock on the door and they wouldn't let them in? Oh, we're tired. We don't want to see anybody, which I get. How many people want people knocking every week to come help them with this tough work? Then they would talk, whether it was me, property management, or the care workers that would come in would say, what song was that you were going to play on the piano when we were able to get to it? Oh, great. And tell me about that music that you were going to do again. Let's go ahead and start moving forward. So that is the most effective way to move people forward, whether or not they're having that moment, that aha moment of insight where they're suddenly able to do things.
Yeah, I've heard that described as keeping your eye on the donut, not the hole. But it's this idea, right? It's this not, oh man, that donut is missing something in the middle, right? You're like, no, there's a donut there. So I think the other thing is, like, I've realized just having dogs that people and animals are far more reward motivated than like away from pain motivated. Like so if I give my dogs treats to get them to implement, change their behavior, they do it really well. Same thing with my son, my kids. Like if I'm like, hey, you'll get this reward. But if I'm like, if you keep doing this, you're going to get punished, or this is going to happen, or there's a problem, and I keep them focused on the problem, I just get more of the problem, and the behavior doesn't change. And so I think, and that's the challenge, I think, is like, that's our temptation, is to try and let's help them see all the problems that we can see and the pain that we can see, instead of helping them, find some toward or forward motivator that's going to lead them towards some pleasure or some positive outcome or some joy that's going to overshadow that. And I think those positive emotions are infinitely so much stronger than the dark ones.
Yes.
Like one little bit of positive is so much stronger than tons of dark, so.
I did a training once for a large conference, and the night before, I think it was for home care workers. So the night before, the person that organized the conference called me and said, I just really want you to stress, how to talk to a hoarder. What's the language we use? And there's things like, you want to mirror their language. You don't want to touch their items without permission. If they say, pardon my collection, go with it and say collection. But when I really started thinking about it, I'm like, you talk to them the exact same way you would talk to anybody else. You motivate them. I mean, yes, there's a mental health component, but if you're not trained to do mental health work, then don't try it. Just
don't try to fix them.
That positive motivation, that unconditional regard for people, and you're going to get a lot more work done, a lot more movement.
So this might be maybe a little off topic, but one of the things that I saw a TED Talk, and this guy was talking about the true nature of addiction, and he was talking about how what causes addiction and addictive behavior, and it sounds like there may be an aspect of addiction somewhat connected to the hoarding, possibly, but he was talking about how they noticed in rats that were like given heroin water or just water that were left alone, they would like just drink the heroin water till they died. But if you gave them like a big space with the toys to play with and other rats to have sex with and like all this fun and whatever, they would not go for the heroin water. They would just go for the regular water. And so he was saying that the real cause of addiction is like a lack of connection,
Mhm.
and how that's really what people are craving. And I would imagine, I mean, the first thing you'd mention is that one of the things they may respond with, that what they really would want, is to be able to have people over
Yeah.
and to be able to connect. And I imagine that, and it seems to be that hoarding seems to always be associated with old age. Does that
That's
seem to be true?
Yes, it's a lot of good information for questions. So the interesting thing with that question is people say that or feel like that. The thing is that this is a chronic and progressive disorder. We recognize that the behavior starts in early adolescence.
And then it gets
However,
worse, is what you mean by
right,
progressive.
right.
Okay.
However, I mean, depending on when somebody has that trauma or loss to trigger the behavior to where it gets out of
Mm-hmm.
control, we don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But we always get that question is why is it always elders that struggle with this so
Mm-hmm.
much? And that's not the case. It's just that they're entering into the system. Remember, I talked about most people with this issue are discovered. They don't, reach out
Right.
for help. So if somebody all of a sudden is requiring, medical help in the home, maybe they need a lift assist, call the fire department, they're getting Meals on Wheels. They've
Right.
fallen and the family has come in for the first time in 7 years.
Then
That's
they're
where we get that idea
exposed.
that it's mostly elders. And the other thing you
Mm.
said about addiction is interesting because hoarding disorder on its own is not an addiction. That being
Okay.
said, the thoughts and the behaviors that go along with this disorder have to be treated like an addiction because they're always going to be there.
Right.
You're never going to cure anybody with hoarding.
Right.
But
Okay.
it's also, hoarding disorder is also almost always accompanied with an addiction to shopping or acquiring, whether it's,
Right.
actively, passively, free stuff, expensive stuff, sale things. So the fact that it's accompanied with that, we have to take those two things separately to treat them. So why is, like you said, what is this acquiring about? What hole void are they trying to fill? Because it's like any other addiction with alcohol and drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And then in addition to that, now what are their thoughts and behaviors as to why they can't let things go once they get them? Because there's lots of people with shopping addictions that don't have hoarding issues.
Yeah. So there's both sides of that. There's the influx of stuff coming into the home, the acquisition of things, and then there's the letting go, which is,
Right.
yeah, both sides of that. All right, that's fascinating. So, Marnie, this is such an interesting conversation. And so, what else should property management entrepreneurs know about hoarding that maybe we haven't touched on?
Sure.
And then how can they get a hold of you, I guess, would be the last thing. So,
Perfect. So one thing that I want to point out is there is a difference between hoarding and squalor. So hoarding is what we've talked about, the hoarding of possessions. Even if we don't feel that the item has value,
mhm,
with hoarding behavior or hoarding disorder, the items in somebody's home have a purpose. They have a purpose for that item. Squalor is that unsanitary, kind of the environmental condition where it's a lot of what everybody agrees with is trash or unsanitary conditions. In the situation with squalor, the person has no purpose for those items. So they're going to easily let them go as long as there's, if they got help, they will do that. So we have situations where there's only hoarding, we have situations where there's only squalor, and then we have the combination of both. And
right,
when they're combined, it's usually because somebody with hoarding issues can't get to those things like to remove the trash. How do you get the trash into the trash can if you can't even get across the hallway to do that? So it's very important to understand that there is a difference. A lot of the stuff you see on the TV shows is crisis, and you'll notice now watching it that a lot of it is squalor. The hoarding is there, but the primary, shock value is the squalor that's occurring in the home.
yeah,
So,
okay,
and as far as getting a hold of me, you can get a hold of me you can contact me through the website, thecluttermovement.com, or you can email me directly at marnie@thecluttermovement.com. And if anybody has any questions ever, feel free to contact me because I'm more than happy to help out and direct you in any way that we can and discuss what consultations would look like and things like that. And one more thing too, we also have a Facebook group. I have Facebook groups for people with issues with clutter. So there's one, the Clutter Movement Individual Support, specifically for individuals struggling. We have the Clutter Movement Family Support, specifically for family members. So if you come across anybody that's even saying, they're having problems with these issues, you can refer people to those groups. Then we
great,
also have the Hoarding Task Force Network. The Hoarding Task Force Network we're an international kind of communication hub for people of all professions that come across hoarding. So we've got the top researchers, the top therapists, we've got professional organizers, we have property managers, we have boards of health, fire department, code enforcement. And it's a great place to say, if you've got an issue with a client that's hoarding, you can go on there and say, hey, this is what's going on. Can anybody offer me some resources or some support? So just for that immediate help to be able to get some ideas.
So this brings me to this. So I want to ask you this. So Marnie, what is your vision like for this whole arena of like hoarding that you're involved in? What is your kind of long-term vision here? Because you obviously have one with these communities that you're doing, with the business that you've created. What sort of drives you?
So what drives me is being able to get a standardized way to approach this issue that everybody can use. So a lot of times what's been happening up to date with hoarding issues is that, the person needs mental health help, which is true, but people only focused on that. And then everybody, different agencies had different checklists to follow, and nobody was familiar with a standardized and objective way to handle hoarding cases. And given that there's a severe lack of mental health support, I'm looking at how can we best help the people that are already out there on the front lines of this. How can we help everybody have a compassionate and effective way to manage this? And so there's two things like that. There's the uniform inspection checklist, but it's also in doing trainings and educating the individuals, the family members, and the professionals in the exact same way as to how a process for resolution goes. Because up until now, it's been, we talk to individuals about, oh, you have a mental health issue, and we're training everybody different ways. And I think that's not the best way to do it. And then with the clutter movement, the two biggest issues we come across with hoarding is the lack of resources, especially, mental health resources and crisis management resources like what I do. And then the cost, because remediation of hoarding cases is extremely expensive. But especially, if you're trying to send somebody to a therapist or get crisis case management, if you don't have a staff member that knows how to do that, so you're paying them $50,000, $60,000 a year to do that, or, somebody who can't pay $100, $200 a pop to see a therapist, what are you going to do? So with the Clutter Movement, what we have is a subscription membership so that we run weekly groups. So the individuals attend a group every week. We have forums and live chat on all different aspects of hoarding issues. We have the same for the family members. And then we're launching the professional one next month, which will include live office hours, so virtual office hours. So people who need a consultation just for that monthly fee can call in and get consultation, get guidance, and get some support.
Marnie, I love it. So here's another question. So if you are able, you obviously have this vision, you've got a plan, the people that you want to serve and have an impact on, that's apparent. If you're looking down, you had a crystal ball and you're seeing the future and you achieve ultimate success with your efforts, what would that world look like? What is your ultimate end goal here? In regards to your mission and what you're doing, how would you know that you've achieved success at the end of your stint doing this, or your time doing this, or your end of your life, or whatever it might be? What would that success look like? What's that vision?
I think that success looks like everybody that's wanting help has easy access to affordable and professional specialized help. Additionally, with that, kind of to give you a little window as to how big I'm kind of thinking with my plan, and with, the Clutter Movement website is one thing, but like I said, there's also funding issues for programs, for agencies to be able to run support groups on site, for people to be able to say, you know what, this place needs cleaned up, we need the help, we need $5,000, $10,000 to help. So the goal is, the first step is, of course, getting the Clutter Movement, that subscription site. Like I said, we have the individual, the family, now we're launching the professional. Once we're able to get those launched, we're going to start taking a portion of all the membership fees and putting it into kind of like a grant fund, so that agencies who want to run a group but don't have the staffing to do it can apply for grant funds to do that. But through that subscription model, we've always, with hoarding, we're like, oh, we need a grant, and that people are fighting for grants. You can't ever get the grant, right. Say you get one year, you can't get it the next year. But with that subscription model, that grant fund, putting a percentage of the membership fees into that, is going to be renewing, just like Angie's List, every month, renewing every month. And so it's a fund that can be used, that's going to be refilled every month, that can start helping to finance and support more and more programs and more help for these people.
Awesome. So that's kind of some of your long-term and maybe more immediate sort of short-term vision. I love it. And so and I imagine you're also open to other people that might hear this or resonate with your vision and say, hey, I want to get involved in this somehow.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So Marnie, fantastic having you come out on the show and give us a little insight into this whole world that maybe many people aren't familiar with this challenge that people might be dealing with, and giving them some insights in how to facilitate and help these people. And I appreciate you coming and sharing all this with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Marnie. Cool. So anybody that was tuning into the show, listening to the show, appreciate Marnie coming out. Make sure that you check her out at thecluttermovement.com and take a look at her programs. She's got that worksheet that you can download from her site so that you can make sure that you know what steps to take initially. And if you need support or have questions, or you just do not know how to handle a situation, it sounds like she's the person to reach out to. She'll help you find the resources and get access to things that you need in your market. If you are new to the DoorGrow show, please be sure to like us and subscribe to us and all these kind of goodies on iTunes. If you're listening to us there, please subscribe. And our mission is to transform property management businesses and their owners. If you are a business owner of a property management company, make sure you get into our Facebook group, which is doorgrowclub.com. You can just go to this doorgrowclub.com. It will redirect to our Facebook group, and you can pop right in there. You have to apply to get access. We are careful about who we let in, and it's for the business owner. So answer all the questions, and hopefully you'll be joining us soon. There is some awesome conversation going on in there. It really has become a community that is making waves and transforming the entire industry, which is our vision and mission. And we'd love to have other awesome entrepreneurs along for the ride towards that vision as well, to transform this industry. So check out the doorgrowclub.com, and thank you for tuning into the DoorGrow Show. Bye, everybody.